Hey Econ Kids, this is Mod 15. It's in section 3. This is your last module of this section in macro. So as you're looking at this section, we're going to actually measure inflation. So we've been talking about inflation and what that means. Now we're going to figure out, well, how do we actually use that and calculate it out, etc. So the first thing you gotta know is we gotta look at these aggregate price levels. An aggregate price level is just a measure of an overall price level in an economy. So as you're measuring this market basket is what we're gonna do. And we're gonna see like how much prices go up or down in this particular market basket. A market basket is just a hypothetical stuff that consumers purchase. They keep track of these market baskets. The one that's most common is the consumer price index. So what is a price index? Well, the price index measures the cost of purchasing that basket over time. So if you look at how you calculate that out, well, the price index in a given year equals the cost of that market basket in a year divided by the cost of that market basket in a base year, okay? And then once we figure out like, okay, we're using, let's say 1982 is our base year, and then 2021 is the market basket we have. If I take the basket that we have here and I divide it by the base year basket here, I will be able to see how much inflation has happened since then. Our inflation rate then is I take the price index from year two, and I subtract the price index in year one, and I divide it by the price index in year one. Multiply those things by 100, and you're gonna get what your inflation rate is, okay? So my consumer price index, it's the most widely used thing for looking at inflation. Basically, it's computed over a month, uses prices for a basket of goods. There's about 80,000 goods and services that they're monitoring. It's a typical urban family of 4. That's what they use. The US isn't the only one that calculates a CPI. I actually have the list of like all the different things that are in here. This is from the 2012 basket of goods and services. And you can see like all the different like things that they're measuring. This is just the grocery part, alcoholic beverages, clothing, footwear, rent, electricity. I mean, like, it goes on and on. There's 18 pages of things that they look at in terms of calculating out this CPI, all right? Pretty interesting measure. So how do we go about doing this? Well, year one on this example is gonna be my base year. Year two is showing me an increase in prices. So I have an orange, a grapefruit, and a lemon, all right? The cost of my market basket. Well, in my basket, I'm gonna have different amounts of things. So I got 200 oranges, 50 grapefruits, 100 lemons. So I'm gonna multiply that out. So I take my 200 oranges times the 20 cents, I'm gonna get a number, 50 grapefruits times the 60 cents, get a number, plus 25 cents times the 100, get a number. That adds up to $95, okay? Now, if I take my current year divided by my base year times 100, in this case, I would take 95 divided by 95 times 100. So the price index for year one is going to be 100. Now, your base year will always be 100 because you're always going to take that number divided by that number times 100. So your base year should always be 100. You wouldn't even really have to calculate that out. You would just know. Okay, so from going forward, base year is 100. Now, year two, what we're trying to figure out is we have to measure year two, stuff like the price there off of the stuff that was in our basket. So we're going to take the same basket of goods, but we're going to multiply it now by this year's prices. So I'm going to say the 200 oranges, the 50 grapefruit, the 100 lemon. Year two adds up to $175. So to figure out my year two price index here, I would take the 175 and divide it by 95 times 100, and then you'd figure out that the price index for year two is 184.21. Okay? So to calculate inflation, you take year two minus year one divided by year one times 100, and what you'd find out is the overall rate of inflation for this market basket of goods from year two to the base year was 84%. All right? That's how you calculate this out going forward. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to go calculate your own market basket, but you're going to do that in class or if you're at home, I guess you're going to do it at home. And then there's an assignment that goes with that. Okay, so if that's as far as we get, pause the video, you'll be done. Now, if we continue on, right, we can look at this inflation problem just to like say, okay, do we know what we're doing here? So if I assume that CPI was 200 in 2006 and 208 in 2007, calculate the inflation rate from 06 to 07. Okay, I'm going to take my second one, 208 minus 200 over 200 times 100. It was 4%. Now, assume CPI was 150 in 2010 and 200 in 2011. What do? 200 minus 150 divided by 150 times 100, 33%. All we're trying to do here is show how inflation is calculated, right? The second year minus the first year divided by the first year times 100 is going to get you that percent. Now, there's other ways that we can measure an economy, right? Or to see like inflation. And instead of using CPI to see if prices are inflated, we could use the PPI, which is the producer price index. And what this measures is the goods and services bought by producers. Now, a lot of times what we see is commodity producers are quick to raise their prices. So PPI responds to inflation and deflation just a little more quick than maybe the CPI does, because they're the ones who are making the goods and services that we're going to purchase, right? So they might see it first, and then you'll see CPI follow after. Does this warning sign, how does it look? Well, you can see in this graph, the PPI is orange and the CPI is green. And as you're looking at it, you can see the orange typically is spiking just a little bit ahead of the green, right? It's just a smidge ahead. Sometimes it's a little more, volatile than the green is, but you can see how it's just a little bit ahead of that one. So it's like a predictor, if you will. The GDP deflator, we'll talk about that one at the end of this section coming up in a little bit. Here's an example of a possible free response question. How do you go about doing this one? Well, if my market basket of goods, now remember, you got to go up there and say, my market basket is 1 watch, 5 hats, and 2 jerseys, right? So calculate the price index in 2010. Now, I told you already, a base year, whatever that adds up to, it's going to end up being 100, right? Because whatever it adds up to, I'm going to take that number and divide it by that number anyway. So my first answer, I don't even really have to calculate. It's just going to be 100. I could figure out that, 1 watch times $100, 5 times 20 is $100. Whoops, I don't even have to. Maybe I won't do times. 5 is $100. 2 here at $50 would be $100. So it's going to be $300, right? Then I'm going to take that $300 total. So 300 divided by 300 times 100, it's going to equal 100, right? So that's my price index for that first one. So now, if I'm looking at this, I can say, oh, well, let's do the second one, right, to figure out, because now calculate the price index in 2011. Well, I have to add up the same things, right? So I have to say, I got, 1 watch, and 1 watch times 150 is 150, and then I got 5 hats, and 5 hats here times the 50 would be 250, and then I have 2 jerseys. So these 2 jerseys times 100 would be like 200. I add that up, I'm going to end up with a price of $600, right? And now to calculate out my price index, though, I have to say, okay, what is my my second year divided by my first year, right? So I got to figure that one out, and I'm going to say, ooh, well, in this case, my second year is 600 divided by my first year of 300 times 100. This is going to be 200. Okay? So now I need to calculate the rate of inflation. Well, if I calculate the rate of inflation, I'm going to take my second number, right? So my 200, I'm going to subtract my first one of 100, and then I'm going to divide by 100. So 200 minus 100 is 100. 100 divided by 100 is 100. And and then I'm going to multiply that 1 by 100, you're going to see that that is 100% inflation, right? So as you're looking at these possible free response questions, probably the trickiest part here is going to be something like, hey, I got to figure out, like, I have to do a little math and I have to see that, like, oh, there's 1 watch, 5 hats, and 2 jerseys. That's what I have to do. And then I just have to know which numbers go where, and you can get those answers. It's not too bad, okay? Now, the last way to do this is to have a GDP deflator. Okay, that's the third way. So if we're looking at inflation, we could have one measure is like the CPI, the other one was like PPI. Now you have this GDP deflator calculation. Okay, we can use that too. The GDP deflator is simply taking the nominal GDP divided by the real GDP times 100. Okay, so remember, real GDP took into account inflation, right? That was the whole point of calculating the difference between nominal and real. So if 2010 had the nominal GDP of 50 and the real GDP of 25, all you have to do is calculate the rate of inflation is take 50 divided by 25 times 100 and get 200, right? That's your index, if you will. And then 200 minus 100 of the base year divided by 100, it was 100%. Okay, so you still got to get that index here, and then you can still measure that inflation off of that. So let's just skip this one for a second. Calculate the real GDP using a price index. If you do that, you can have the nominal GDP divided by the price index to get the real GDP. If I'm calculating real GDP using the deflator, then I can take nominal GDP divided by the deflator to get the real GDP. I can do it either way, whether I have a price index or I have a deflator. You just have to do whatever the problem is telling you, right? I'm either going to do a price index one, which we calculated out before using like CPI, or I'm going to use the deflator. I could do that one too, okay? Going back to this slide, once again, if nominal GDP is 100 billion and real GDP is 80 billion, what's the deflator? Well, to get the deflator, I got to take that nominal GDP divided by real times 100. Right? So the deflator in this case is going to be 125. If the GDP deflator was 100 in 2009, what's the rate of inflation? Well, I'm going to do the exact same calculation. Just like if I had a price index, I'm going to take 125 minus 100 divided by 100 times 100. Inflation was 25%. I know that sounds sort of confusing. I have a sheet that goes shows you the ways of doing it, whether you're given the deflator or given a price index, and then it calculates out for you. By the time you're done doing enough of these, it really isn't maybe as complicated as that looks. Okay?